subscribers only. 20 minutes. Poll up. Let me put a poll up. There we go. There we go. I don't know what the fuck going on. All my bars. I got all the bars. I don't know what the fuck going on. Anyway, we back. What's up, chat room? We back. Another video. I was starting off by saying rest in peace, Bishop Frank L. Stewart. Rest in peace, Bishop Frank Lamont Stewart. Growing up in church, man, like, I'll go back to what I was saying, my experience in music, when it comes to this African versus American music thing, it's only been something I've been sort of, what the fuck I hear, goddamn mosquito? Fuck out these goddamn mosquitoes. But I was raised like everybody else, and I'm an American, and I'm a black American in American schools, and I've been taught my whole life that basically I've been taught. Come on now. Yeah, we back in here. Yeah, y'all here? I got a call that came through. I'm getting calls and shit. And the person I just got a call from, you ever get a call from somebody that you know some shit just went down? Now I kind of wish I didn't start my live. I wish I was able to pick up that phone call to find out what the fuck happened. Because the person that just called me is the only time that person that calls this late is when some shit just happened. You know, that's the only time they call me is some shit just happened. Shit, I be waiting to get comments got their ass for that person to be calling me. Something happened. But anyway, back to what I was saying. This ties into the discussion we're having tonight. An influence. I did everything like I used to be. If you talk to me 6, 7 years ago, before the pandemic, I'll be the first one. It's all African. You look at some of my posts from 2016. You'd have heard me talking about all of the African influence in our music. Appreciate that, Roach Dog, the super chat. I would be one of the first ones to tell you to find the African and point it out. But it was that something happened during the pandemic. The pandemic gave us all time, you know? And I'm someone, I used my time wisely during the pandemic. I used my time very wisely and researching. But also, during the pandemic, you know, you had time to sit back and reflect and ask questions, ask proper questions. And the answer, the answer is always in the question. Hello. The answer is in the question. You know, you're not going to get the right answers if you don't know to ask the right questions. And I started questioning a lot of this stuff during the pandemic back in 2020. That's when I started questioning a lot of this stuff because it gave me time to question. And through asking these critical questions, I drew in the last 5 years a different conclusion. I am not about to sit here and be like I was always on the way that I'm on right now, you know, because I learned a lot of music history in college. Santa Monica College, Cal State Northridge, and also high school. That's in high school, but for the most part, lot of music history and theory and those type. And you know, so and they would even tell you, okay, the banjo is African, this is African, that's African, and you just go along and you believe it because that's what's being told. If you're a good student, you just, I was a good student. That's shit. That's what they telling me. That's what it is. And you hear it all the time. You listen to John Henry Clark, and I love John Henry Clark. You listen to the great scholars, James Smalls, Brother Kaba Kamene, and they tell you African is African that, Dr. Ben, Tony Browder, and all of the greats. Everything the greats talk about, Africa, 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 Africa. And they're not wrong. They're just not, they just giving you some of the information. And like I said, rest in peace, Bishop Stewart. Playing the drums in church from the age of 14 to the age of 32, around the country. You see things. You have an experience with it. For me, music isn't just scholarship; it's playing. I understand I understand the language of rhythm. And every culture, every country, its own language and rhythm. You know, every country, every culture, every part of the planet has its own drum and its own rhythm. So that takes me to this whole, again, before I go there, I said, rest in peace, Bishop Stewart. You provided a place for a young man like me to learn music, in your church. That's where I met Ron Lee Davis, former member of the Earth and Fire Phoenix Horns. Skip Scarborough, writer for Earth and Fire. His son was over our music ministry. Our former Congo drummer, played for like Rolls Royce, and the emotions would come through and be with Miss LaCarol Pratt, our music minister. And I had such a rich cultivation in music, playing music for 20 years in the black church. Playing music in a black church gave me such a rich foundation. Such a rich foundation. So, with that being said, I need y'all to share this because we got booted off earlier. Y'all to share this video, like, and let's get it in. But I will be interacting with you. So if y'all have anybody in the chat has any questions, and you need me to explain what we're talking about, just let me know, all right? Y'all with me, chat? Press number 1 if you're here. Oh, all right, cool. So let's get it in. Roots versus influence. Appreciate the order, Cyberdime. You got the t-shirt 2 days ago. I hope you like it. That. They're always influence. They're always talking about influence, never roots. See, influence is a tricky word. Man, I would love to interview Al Bell. Shit. Man, if I can get my hands on interviewing Al Bell, I would stop everything that I'm doing to interview and talk to Al Bell. Hell yeah, Hanson. Of course I would. If I knew anyone that had any kind of contact with Al Bell, I would so hit them up. I got some other interviews coming. I got some people helping me out. But I'm just not going to announce them right now. I got some other pretty dope interviews coming my way. Some legendary artists and music executives. But we they talk about influence all the time. Influence is like the wind in the air. It's kind of like the wind influence you to put a jacket on. The wind, the air, and the temperature can influence you to wear shorts. Climate is what is climate and weather are two different things. The climate is the overall climate of an environment. You know, LA has a Mediterranean climate. You have rain climates. You have mountain climate. And this is the overall trend of what to expect on a daily basis in these environments. Weather is the influence, uh, the day-to-day influence. Some days it's windy, some days it's not. And if it's windy, sometimes it's really windy, sometimes it's less windy, but it's no real way to measure the influence of, uh, how can I say this, a 2-hour period of one day in one city in 1 year. Sometimes here in LA is warm. Sometimes I'm influenced for a jacket. There's really no way to understand by understanding its climate. I know if I'm going to Florida in August, the climate is going to be hot and muggy. Every now and again, it's going to be some rain. Every now and again, it's going to be floods. Every now and again, it's hurricanes. But overall, August in Florida is going to be hot. And if it rains and it has one day in the summer where it rains and now it's dropped down to 75 degrees, that's just the climate in Florida through a day of weather. Do y'all hear what I'm saying? Our music is rooted in America. And every now and again, there's some African influence. First off, we can't discount or disprove if what they call African influence wasn't already going on here in America. Like they say, African influence is call and answer. That's one major thing. Let's just go down the list of say is African influence in our music, and let's break down what they say. Okay, call and answer is influence in our music. Well, the next appreciate that the next question is if call and answer is the African link to our music, how often do we use call and answer? Is call and answer in every song? No. Is it in most songs? Not really. Not really. It depends on the genre you're talking. Funk don't have that much call and answer. Although there are a lot of songs that do. And the next question would be, did call and answer exist in indigenous American music? And the answer is yes and no. It really depends on the tribe that you're talking. Some of the music down in Alabama from like the Poarch tribe, when you research African music, I'm not indigenous music, American Indian music, tribes at the Poarch, they had call and answer. East Coast Cherokees, there's call and answer in their music too. So seeing that a lot of the tribes here, Powhatan and these other tribes, seeing that call and answer also existed in their music means we cannot definitely determine that call and answer came from Africa when we can prove its existence that was already here before the slave trade. Am I making sense, chat room? Let me know if I'm making sense. Let me know if I'm making sense. Can we say it came from Africa when there is mounds of evidence that it was already here? That's like saying, okay, you come to my house, I have a TV. But you have a TV at your house. Your house is well known for having TV. And somebody neutral comes to my house. You're the person that's known for having TVs. I'm somebody, these people in my house. If you're known for having TVs and they see both you and me there, they're going to assume that you brought me this TV. When the fact of the matter is, I already had a TV. This ain't your TV, this is my TV. Yes, you're well known for having TVs, but it doesn't mean that I don't have one. You see how that works? Do you see how that works? Just because I could show that you have doesn't mean that that disproves what I already have. So you can't say that, okay, the only way you can prove definitively that call and answer came from Africa is if you prove it did not exist on the American continent. You see what I mean? If I can't say that that thing didn't exist on this landmass before, how can I say you brought it? And then when I study what was already here, I see it existed in the music that was already here. The second point, they say, okay, shows African influence. Well, when you look up music of like people like the Lenape tribe up in New York, in that New York area, the Lenape also have polyrhythmic music. Music that was in the Alabama region, polyrhythms are found there too. No one, unless you can prove that these indigenous tribes went to Africa to get their polyrhythms, you cannot say that polyrhythms were brought here from Africa when you already have polyrhythms here in America. Daniel Cooper, you a fool for that. Space age pimping. Appreciate that, Dami. But these are questions. If you have a background in anthropology like I do, these are questions that an anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist, would have to ask. Like, I thank God for my background in music history and also in the soft sciences like cultural anthropology, because cultural anthropology teaches you intercultural class, like intercultural communication, sociology, those type soft sciences teach you to ask these questions. Because when I was in cultural anthropology class in college, when I wrote an essay talking about things like, here's one example. It was found that cotton, like Egyptian cotton, well, cotton's all over the place, but the cotton that's in Egypt has a particular chemical component that the cotton in Mississippi doesn't have. And you can trace and see, okay, this Egyptian cotton got into Europe. When they talk about cotton in Europe, you can talk about the Egyptian cotton that got into Europe, and you can trace when it got there. When the Moors went to Spain, you can trace it. Things like elements like alcohol didn't exist in Spain until the Moors brought it. There was a time where they were going through plagues, and they didn't have medicine and alcohol in Spain, in France. But you could literally mark the time period that alcohol and medicine got there. So you could safely say the Moors brought medicine to Spain because this medicine didn't exist in Spain before the Moors got there. That's how you're able to accurately say, okay, this came from Spain, this came from Africa, because in one moment it wasn't here. Now this new group of people came, and now it's there. You can't do that with other forms of music. I mean, with music. You can't do that. So they can't do that when it comes to music. They just came from Africa. Trust me. Everything that came from Africa, they say, trust me. They don't go further to prove it didn't exist. It doesn't happen. And then the next step is, okay, let's give you that. Let's say, okay, all call and response, our style of call and response came from Africa. Okay, fine. Our music, they say, okay, polyrhythms came from Africa. Okay, fine. Which rhythms is the next question? Because rhythms have names. Like we have American rhythms like the swing. Although African rhythms swung their notes, they didn't play a swing. You don't find shuffles in Africa. You don't find the Charleston. You don't find backbeat. These core components and core rhythms that we have in America can only be found here. They're not in Africa. So the next question after that is, okay, if we conclude, let's just play devil's advocate and say, okay, polyrhythms are African, calling answers African. Then the next thing to say is, okay, next question. How often do you hear a banjo music? Is the banjo an essential core component of our music? When was the last time in the chat room? Can anyone tell me the last time they heard a banjo being played in American music? What's up, Tierra? When was the last time, chat room? Can you guys name the song? Hey, everyone in here listen to music all the time. What's up, Jay Jimerson? When was the last time you've heard a banjo being played in our music? Every song you hear, there's an instrument being played. If every song you hear, music is being played, an instrument is being played either acoustically or through a machine, when was the last time a banjo sound was used in anything that you listen to? And I listen to a lot of music. Next question. The drums are African. The next question would be, okay, which drums are African? Because everything is a drum that you hit. That wall is a drum. Do y'all know that people like Leon Silvers would use wood blocks as a bass drum in the studio? I was actually talking, on Monday I was talking to G-Mac. G-Mac was, and Tierra, you may know who these people, Tierra, I don't know if you remember the Polyester Players here in LA. What's up, Miriam? If you was around LA in the 90s, in the night, especially in the 90s, in the 2000s, late 80s, you heard that it was a band that was real popular around LA called the Polyester Players. That's where Kamasi got his start. A lot of those guys that ended up playing for Death Row Records, they got their start with Polyester Players. He was talking about doing a studio session with Battle Cat. And salute Battle Cat. Battle Cat's a fucking legend. But he was talking about doing a session with Battle Cat, and how Battle Cat, there was like a wood, like, you know, like a podium you have, and Battle Cat put a mic to that podium and started like banging on the podium, and that was his bass sound. How is the drums African when all four corners of the earth have their own virgin natural materials of the land you stand? Isn't necessarily a formal thing. I forgot what song he said he was doing. Battle was knocking his hand against the podium. If you go and listen, there was a video I saw, and it was the Whispers. See if you can find it. It's an interview that the Whispers was doing. They were talking about recording with Leon Silvers, that song "And the Beat Goes On." They were like, Leon Silvers was banging on shit in the studio to enhance the sound of the drum. Yeah, high school benches and lunch tables are drums. So when they say drums are African, that's very cheap. Because drums are whatever you can fucking put your hands on. That's a drum. Take this from a drummer. A drum is whatever you could get your hands on to make a sound. And the way the drum is played is unique to the rhythm of the continent, of the nation, of the city, of the town that you're in. You see what I mean? Drums aren't African. Drums, where the fuck are you at? Wherever you stand, that's the drum. China has its own drums, and each region, each continent, each country has their own twist on what they use as a drum. The Caribbean is tropical, so those steel drums are Caribbean. You can't get those steel drums that are from Trinidad. You're not gonna get. They're not gonna play no steel drums in Mali, because to have a tropical sound in a desert would sound stupid. Think about that. Yeah, I have another channel. My other channel is a card playing incense. I have two other channels: Incense and Ashtrays and King of Cards. But I don't use those other channels yet. But think about the Caribbean steel drum. Think about how stupid that would sound for people who are in Chad to be playing a Caribbean steel drum. It wouldn't even. It would be like, but the Caribbean steel drum, the steel drum out of Trinidad through Jamaica, those steel drums sound good. They sound pretty good when you're in Fiji, when you're in an island tropical environment. Those steel drums make sense. They don't make sense in the desert. They don't make sense in the forest. They don't sound like the forest. So you're not going to hear no steel drum in the forest because they don't sound like the forest. You see what I mean? Sound like your environment. Like, well, if you ever studied linguistics, language and how we speak is oftentimes predicated on the environment. When I was in voice and diction, when I was in Santa Monica College, I took a voice and diction course, and we were talking about how people sound. Like the South moves slow, so people talk slower in the South. Yeah, uh, because the South, if you're in a rural area, the pace is slower. So the pace of how people speak is slower. The 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 volume in which you speak. New Yorkers are loud. Why? Because New York is loud. Trains, subways, 10 million people stacked on top of each other. So the people in New York, and even in the boroughs, and each borough speaks differently. People from Queens speak way different from people in Brooklyn. The environment dictates how you speak. If you look at England, England is cold. London is cold. So in London, they don't really talk through their nose. They don't breathe through their nose. All of their mouth, when they speak, it comes through their mouth, not through their nose, because when you're in a cold environment, breathing in cold air, you see how that works? People from London don't, in cold environments, they don't speak they sort of shut their nose off when they speak. Versus a warm environment like Farsi, like those Arabic languages, is hot. So a lot of hot with it, hot. You see what I mean? In hot countries, they hot. I know it sounds like a joke, but we would have these discussions oftentimes in class. The heat makes you hot. The the languages vary, and your language is an interpretation of your environment. You from the Caribbean, tropical environments, they oftentimes hear in color. People that in jungle and forested areas, they hear colors. So a certain sound may be yellow, another sound is green, another sound is red. And that's also why, like, when you listen to music out of the Caribbean, Latin, like what they call Afro-Cuban jazz and Caribbean music, it's very colorful, very colorful. Steel drums are color. Deserts don't have color. So that's another reason why steel drums wouldn't work in deserts, because deserts don't have color. Steel drums punctuate color. Cities don't have a lot of color. So steel drums don't work in concrete jungles. There are no colors to interpret. But if you're in the Caribbean, it's color everywhere. The birds, the ground, the water, the blue, the greens, there's color everywhere. So the sound has to mimic color. You see what I mean? Your environment makes the sounds. So when they talk about drums, Latin drums they use timbales. They use a lot of wood claves in Latin music because it's a lot of wood. A lot of wood claves. A lot of like the. Damn it! I have my shit. I got my drum bag in the garage, but I want to go back in there and fuck up this Wi-Fi signal. I got to get AT&T out here again, fix my Wi-Fi. But the the right, and so Asian has its own environments to deal with. Here in America, Black American art are 50% drums, 50% cymbals. We have a bass and treble syncopation in American music, and what makes they'll in African music they don't have the same level of bass treble syncopation. Left hand on the piano versus the right hand, the highs and the lows. On the drum set, it's the highs, the treble, the hi-hat. The hi-hat and the ride cymbal keep the time. That's a treble. The snare is in treble. Yeah, now you have darker snares that can go into a bass register, but for the most part, snare is a treble instrument. The kick drum is a bass. So on the drum set, kick, duh. That's what makes the sound. Then you got the snare, that pop, 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 pop. That's the snare. The hi-hat, ride cymbal, has sustain. The hi-hat is quick, staccato. The ride cymbal has sustain. And then you got your cymbals, crash, splash. The splash is what you don't normally like. You don't see those too much anymore, but I still play with the splash. Usually 8 or 12, anywhere 8 inches or 10 inches. But usually your cymbal is a crash, and most of the time crashes are 16, 18. Most crashes you hear are 16 or 18 inch crashes. And then you have the toms, mid-range, do, 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 usually 3 times, do, do, do. And those components make up the Black American drum set. The toms look like and sound like Indian drums. They'll lie to you on Wikipedia and say, oh, the tom-toms came from China. How the fuck the Chinese did Black Americans in goddamn St. Louis get a tom-tom from a Chinese person? When the Lenape tribe had similar drums to the tom-toms. The Iroquois, these different native tribal baby Dodds, the person who really codified what the drum set is, the components on the drum set, he was the grand of an Indian drummer, Indian message drummer. Yes, sir, Jay Jimerson. So, Scotty. That's right, bro. 45 people take credit from us. And the reason why I'm having this conversation with y'all is because you guys aren't drummers. So you wouldn't be able to vocalize this. You're not going to read this anywhere. Even people who are drummers, like going back to, again, rest in peace, Bishop Stewart. When I used to play the drums in church, I was in college. I wasn't one of those dudes that, like a lot of people went to church as a kid, left and came back. I stayed. I stayed through college. I stayed in church till I was 32. So when I was in college taking these anthropology classes, I would do my own tests. I'll be on the drums playing, and I would just sometimes be playing a straight 1-3 on the kick. Ka, 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 ka. Play that 1-2. An example will be a song like Remember the Time. The thing that makes you pop and lock, do pop lock and all that kind of stuff is a beat with a 1-2. And the dancing that black people do, black Americans dance in the space between the beats. That's why as a drummer and a bass player, we gotta dig a pocket. Because the dancing happens between the beats. And versus you do a song like Push by One Way. Dun, 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 or Jiggalette by Tina Marie. Dun, 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 dun. That variation on the kick is gonna take you from dancing to pop to doing the robot. If I want to make you do the robot, do a quick 1E on the kick. Dun, 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 dun. Just when I put that did it, that's going to influence your body to start doing the robot, doing the pop lock, just by what I'm doing on the kick pedal. Now, as a dancer, you don't know this. But for years, I would sit on the drum and just change up my kick, change up the snare. Like people from the Caribbean music, I mean, what they call like Latin music, they sort of dance on top of the beat. So that's where you get the and the same thing with the a lot of the Afro beat. That's why you get that because their dances require the movement of those parcels of land require you to be on top of it. We do our stuff behind the beat. You know, tempos. If I'm playing the tempo of love music is 60, 70 BPMs. The slow tempo, I want a wood lady. Ooh. I gotta keep that in the 60s and the 70s beats per minute. If I want to tap into your heart, I have to. I'm better off if I want to sing a message of love and companionship and friendship and unity. I'm better off leaving from 4 and going into 6/8. And 6/8 mimics the heartbeat. When your heartbeat, it goes did it. So as a drummer, when I want to connect to your heart, and we put it in 6/8, 1, 2, 3, da ta, da da, da ta, da da. That's why a lot of your church music has that, and it has that sway to make you da da da. Versus I can switch it up into a waltz. That's a waltz. The waltz comes out of Europe, and the waltz came to America by way of Francis Johnson, black composer in 1818, versus a shuffle. All of these different rhythms make a different effect. And they're all deeply intrinsic in Black American music. That's why our music requires a drum set and not steel drums. That's why our music requires a drum set and not timbales. That's why our music requires a drum set and not African hand drums. African hand drums can't provide you these rhythms. That's not what they're set up to do. African hand drums are created to provide African rhythms. Africa has its own rhythms that they created drums to lay the foundation for. Yes, I'm teaching in my course. Oh yeah, thanks for reminding me, Kenny Red. I'm such a bad self-promoter. I'm doing the children's course, no weed, of course, and no cussing. This summer, children's summer school, I'm teaching them the history of our music, the composers, the artists, the instruments, and what makes our music unique. So you want to teach this information to your children because your children have to know this. Okay? Yes, I will be teaching this in my course. And if you're an adult and you want to enroll, that's fine. You just want all of the course materials are going to be catered to children. But if you want to enroll and listen, be my guest. I can't tell you not to. Matter of fact, if you're a parent, I would like parents to actually sit in with their children. I would prefer if parents sat in with their children. I would prefer that. And it's only one charge per household. If it's multiple households, then type in the product code MORE if it's going to be in more households, but it's only one charge per household. If you got 3 kids in the same house, then that's all under the same, you know. So, what's up, Blackmatic? So, we in America, Black America, we created our own rhythms to walk in sync with our own times. Go to dewanb.com/courses. Type on courses. If you click on courses, it's the first course that's up on dewanb.com. And we're going to do this on Skype, all right? Not Skype, Zoom. This course is going to be on Zoom. But all of these things make up the components of Black American music. Now that I've only given you, I haven't even given you 1% of what I understand about how this shit works. Trust me. So if you hear niggas out here taking my shit, make sure y'all tag me and give me credit, because y'all hear I promise y'all don't hear nobody else on the internet talking like this. So now there are going to be some other channels that are going to try to explain it, but they won't be able to explain it because they don't have my experience, and they're going to be fumbling and stumbling, and that's fine. That's fine. But I'm only giving you 1% of what it is. It goes way deeper. Now that I've showed you the importance and how Black American drum set work, and that's just one instrument, tell me where the African influence is on that. Chat room, help me out here. Just that little I gave y'all about the drum set. Is that story not more interesting than talking about the African influence? What's a more interesting story? The African influence or an explanation on just what you're hearing every day in 99% of the songs you're listening to? Would you rather hear about, what's more important, hearing about some African polyrhythm or hearing these things that you hear in every song that you hear? What's a more deeper conversation? What's more likely? What conversation can go further? We gonna talk about some African banjo that you don't hear in any song ever? You ain't never heard a banjo played in SWV? You ain't never heard Kanye West put a banjo in no fucking song? You ain't heard no goddamn banjos being played at Motown or Philadelphia International? Hell, Madonna don't even have no goddamn banjo. That's the difference between influence and foundation. The roots. The foundation is a much deeper story, and it's a more useful story because it helps you interpret what you're listening to now. And even if you talk about the truth is, do you know the first banjo found in America was made in America? Do y'all know that? If the banjo came from America, from Africa, why is the first banjo found that's in America? Why was it made in America? No, it was made by Americans. Why? Do you know that the first djembe drum in America in the 1850s, it's in the Smithsonian. The first djembe drum in America was made out of American wood, not African wood. You know that? And why do you never hear a djembe drum in Black American music? And why does the drum set not take anything from the djembe? Black American polyrhythms and African polyrhythms are two different things. African polyrhythm comes from a group of drummers. There are 8 different drums playing different rhythms. There's your polyrhythm. In Black America, the polyrhythm is on one person. Left foot is playing one rhythm, your right foot is playing a different rhythm. It's playing, your right hand is playing one rhythm. Damn, Devin, you timed somebody out for 86,000 seconds? Damn, what they say? I missed what they said. Keep the time minutes. Damn, what they say? I missed what they said. So, what I'm playing on a drum set is completely different than what's happening on African drums. African drums don't have a hi-hat. There is no drum in the African drum corps that mimics a hi-hat. You could say in African, there may be some African drums that mimic the kick. There's no a crash cymbal. And crash is very because it breaks tension. There's no African drum that mimics the ride cymbal. The ride cymbal gives the song air. Put some rivets in that ride, then it sizzles. The hi-hat gives it tempo. The hi-hat sounds like a train. The American, the train was in America before it was in America before it was in Africa. The train is very important. Train. We invented the lubrication system, the real McCoy. We invented the linking system. My great-granddad, next month, July. Next July is going to be anniversary. My great-great-great-granddad, Alfred Hoggett, invented the automatic railroad crossing. His patent is still in use till this day around the world. Well, when you listen to a hi-hat sounds like a steam train. In disco, it sounds like and funk is See a subtle difference? Let me give you an example. A disco song. Um, Earl Young created the 4 and 4. The love I lost is a sweet love. That's disco. That's house music. That's EDM. Funk is come along. I don't know. Behind the beat. The funk is behind it. The disco's in front of it. But it's pressure release, like a train, like a steam engine. The instruments mimic the environment. No, they didn't steal from my great granddad. He sold the patent. He got the patent. The patent is still in his name, but he sold it. And he moved my family from Michigan to LA. Now, he should not, if he was able to get passed down like a white family, if he had Homestead Land Act money and was white, he would have been able to fund his patent, and we could have kept the patent and developed it and made a hell of a lot more money, still be making money. But he wasn't a poor man, but he wasn't a rich man either. He was a barber. He was a barber in Benton Harbor, Michigan, made an honest salary. So he sold the patent and moved the family to LA. Yeah, he didn't have the funding to develop it, so he had to sell it. But he actually got the patent. He got awarded the patent. No one stole anything from him. He sold it. Yeah, you're right, Miriam. The snare. The snare. Rattlesnakes are American. Africa got other shit. The rattlesnake, the diamondback. The rattlesnake is America's most dangerous snake. That's not the rattlesnake. That's our problem. So the snare mimics the rattles of the snake. You put rattle. What a snare is a rattle. It's a drum with a rattle under the bottom. And when you hit the drum, instead of it going boom, it goes. So we got to understand roots are where they lay. You know how fucking stupid you niggas sound when y'all talk about African roots. When Africa doesn't even do what we do, they do something completely different. That's like saying a redwood tree is rooted in Africa. There are no fucking redwoods in Africa. Africa has its own goddamn trees. Just like China got its trees, Mongolia got its trees. If I want to see a fucking redwood, I go to Northern California. That's like saying, oh, the redwood tree, that's like me going to New York and saying, well, the redwood is New York, because no, the redwood is from there. It's from Washington to California. It's the only place you're gonna find a fucking redwood. Well, the tree is still African because the first tree is from Africa. Okay, but this tree was created in this climate, on this specific piece of land. Palm trees, they're from Florida. It's like saying, okay, well, the palm trees, no, nigga. Like, what are you talking about? Because it's a tree. A tradition is what the fuck it is. And here's dude talking some field hollers. Question black people. Name the last song you heard a field holler. And then let's just go to the instruments. Let's go past the drum. I've spoken right now for almost an hour just on one instrument. And I probably gave you 0.005% of what I understand about drums. I didn't even give you a percent of what I understand about drums. And just in that less than the percent I gave you, you can rule out African drums having any influence on Black American drums. How is African, and then we say African music, what part of Africa? South African music is different than Ghanaian music. Hell, the Yoruba and the Igbo within Nigeria have different music, completely different. The music out of Mali, Morocco, Egypt, Sudan, Congo, Tanzania, all of these places, Eritrean music is completely different than Sudanese music. Like, there's so much diversity in African music. So if you say African, what part? What tribe? And on top of that, the centerpiece in American music is the piano. Show me the indigenous West African music that's centered around the piano. They say we came from West Africa. Okay. Show me the African music centered around the piano. Wait. No, it doesn't make sense, Preacher John, because you don't know music. You just listen to a whole bunch of niggas and koofies tell you a whole bunch of shit they barely understood themselves because they don't know music. That's why you're confused. American music is centered around the piano. The piano runs on a 7-note scale. African music has a 5-note pentatonic scale. They don't even run on the same musical scale. I'm about to go off camera, but I'm still here. I'm still here. Our music is centered around the piano. Name the West African music that builds their music around the piano. How is our music any way, shape, or form African if it's not even structured the same, not even using the same materials? Show me what's the West African music that's centered around the piano. I'll wait. The saxophone is a core component of jazz music. Jazz is American classical. Jazz is American classical. Name one African music across the continent that the saxophone is indigenous to, that plays with the saxophone before American influence. They do now because of John Coltrane. But name one African music that had a saxophone in it before John Coltrane, before Charlie Parker. Can you name one? No, you cannot name one African music that uses a saxophone. You can find other woodwinds, but those are all woodwinds that we don't use. And they're keyed in a different scale. Name the African music that uses a saxophone. You can't. It doesn't exist. Because the saxophone was built in Europe by Adolphe Sax in 1858. Adolphe Sax invented the saxophone, and it was a failed instrument in Europe. It was a failed instrument in America. Nobody used the saxophone until who? Ornette Coleman for the tenor, and Charlie Parker picked up an alto. When Charlie Parker picked up that alto, when bebop was introduced, the saxophone went from being an obscure, failed instrument to the sound of America. Now, you got that Jamaican musician, Muskego, I think his name is Masego, something like that. He plays the saxophone. Fela Kuti, you have saxophones and all that shit in Fela's music. Fela's the first African, and him and Fela out of West Africa, and what's his name? Hugh Masekela in South Africa. Those were the first Africans to use horns, saxophones. And they were both inspired by James Brown. So if our music is African, why are Africans' biggest musicians playing like us? Hugh Masekela. They talk to you all the time about Fela, but Hugh Masekela was bigger than Fela in the 70s. That song, great. Hugh Masekela's version of Grazing in the Grass, niggas in America like that. But who did Hugh Masekela hire to play the saxophone in his band? The alto. Ronnie Laws. Ronnie Laws got his start with Earth, Wind & Fire. He was on the Earth, Wind & Fire Head to the Sky album. And then he went and played with Hugh Masekela, South Africa. Ronnie Laws, he's still alive. Look him up. Yeah, Lester Young. Yep. Coleman Hawkins. Yep, that's saxophone. You see how like these Pan-Africans, they short circuit. See that dude that was coming in talking about Africa this, Africa that? He short circuited and had to get the fuck out of here. And here's another reason why. Also, look, I should never have to say this, and I'm probably gonna stop saying it pretty soon. This is with no disrespect. This is not denying Africa anything. None of that. I shouldn't have to say that. But it's actually disrespectful to put on to a group of people something that they didn't do and didn't ask for it to be put on. Africans don't go around claiming jazz. Africans don't claim our shit. Pan-Africans claim our shit. Pan-Africans, y'all the only niggas claiming our shit. Africans don't claim this shit. I had a homeboy named Kimi Akinwale. His name was, so he was, I think he was, don't get me fucked up, Nigerians. I don't know if he was Yoruba or Igbo. I don't know. I don't even know the different houses. I don't know. But he was looking like, man, this jazz, I love jazz, but this shit ain't ours. We got our own shit. Africans don't be claiming our shit. Africans like their own shit. The only people who do this shit is Pan-African Americans. They're the only ones. They're the only ones. Same thing with Jamaicans. them Rasta niggas and them real Jamaicans, them Maroons, them motherfuckers ain't claiming shit that's American. They don't give a fuck about no goddamn hip hop. Them real Jamaicans don't give a fuck about hip hop, and they'll tell you, man, get that shit out of here. It's just New York Jamaicans that are doing that. If you listen to Fela Kuti, before you listen to Fela, listen to Bitches Brew by Miles Davis, and there you go. Fela's music is his African attempt to sound like a mixture of James Brown and Bitches Brew by Miles Davis. That's all of Fela's music. It's a fusion. It's an African, I don't say a fusion, it's an African version of Bitches Brew. And I speak like this because I really do want to influence the next generation of musicians. You're only going to be a great musician because the form you get to innovation before there's 3 steps to innovation. You have imitation first, then you got fusion, to where you fuse the imitation with what you're about to sound like, and then you have innovation. But you got to imitate to innovate. Imitation is the foundation of innovation. Like Herbie Hancock said, you learn everything there is to know about music, and then you forget it all. And that's what jazz is. Jazz is learning everything about music and forgetting it all. Well, the only way our babies coming up are going to be able to learn it and learn the foundation the right way is if they know where to look. All of our music is rooted in blues and jazz. And if you want to move the sound forward, you're going to have to master the Black American blues and jazz and gospel. And once you get that blues foundation, that gospel foundation, that jazz foundation, you got to be rooted in one of those 3. Most musicians are rooted in 2 of those 3, some all 3. Mostly everybody's rooted in gospel and church. But all of our master musicians are rooted in either blues, jazz, or gospel, or usually 2 of the 3. And once you get that down, you can then push it forward and create the next new thing, because that's a major staple in our music is innovation. And that's another reason why people, these fake Pan-Africans that go around talking about everything, this is a message to the people who are always trying to root our music back in Africa. You're now missing the core component of what makes our music great. The core component of what makes our music great is the innovation. That's what jazz is. Yesterday don't sound like today. And if you spend the whole conversation saying, well, that's still African, while at the same time, there is no music in Africa that does this, like American jazz, you're doing the youngsters coming up a disservice. The youngsters need to be looking at Dizzy Gillespie. Our 7 and 8-year-olds, there shouldn't be a Black kid that by the age of 8, they don't know who Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, John Coltrane, Mahalia Jackson, Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, Louis Armstrong, Scott Joplin, Diana Ross, Smokey Robinson, Stevie Wonder. All of our children should know these names by 8 years old, by 10. Because I'll tell you what, them Asian kids know all them names. I promise you that. Them Japanese kids, they know who Horace Silver is. Why them Japanese kids know, but your black ass kids don't? Count Basie, Jimmy Lunsford, Duke Ellington. Duke Ellington, like Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday. These should be household names. And I'm not saying you should listen to these artists every day, because at the end of the day, your music is going to be whatever you like. Music is personal. So I don't tell people, but we should teach our children the palette. We should get their ears comfortable with jazz. That's why y'all got to subscribe to my Patreon. On my Patreon, I do my morning meditations, and we go through and teach you how to listen to jazz, how to consume jazz. You consume jazz with a different ear than you consume popular music. It's with a different ear, but that ear, jazz is healing. Like John Coltrane, Alice Coltrane. What you guys don't understand is what John Coltrane was doing, and his wife Alice Coltrane picked it up after he died, along with Pharoah Sanders, and they were making music to really heal your soul, dude. You had a death, you had something go on in your life, you're going through some stress. Go listen to Alice Coltrane, Blue Nile. Go listen to her album she had with Carlos Santana. I mean, we literally have music that's created to help you disconnect. And there's so much to be said for what's done and created here. You got niggas that'll come in my chat room and argue with me about a fucking trace that they can't even trace back to Africa. It's just what somebody said. Does it make sense? Chat room, just tell me, chat room. Tell me if I'm making sense or not, chat, please. Please tell me if I'm making sense. Do you are you guys starting to understand why it's more important that we talk about what we have here than to stop always be talking about some goddamn Africa? Does it make sense to you? Appreciate that, Jay Jimerson, Chief. I mean, because where we spend our time and where attention goes, energy flows. So where you spend your attention, energy flows there. And to keep pinning everything in Africa, for the 388,000 that did come here from Africa, they've had 400 years to bring us back for those who came from there. And for those who do believe in the transatlantic slave trade the way it's taught in schools, I believe the truth is in the middle. But for those, I'm just going to play devil's advocate and say, let's all believe what they told us about the transatlantic slave trade in school. Well, if Africa had 400 years to make that right. Africa got a lot of land, a lot of mineral resources. They've had 400 years to make that right, and they haven't. So why would you spend 89, 98% of your energy on talking about a trace amount of Africanness in our music, a very small trace amount? Why would you spend 90% of the time talking about that small trace amount for a continent that had 400 years to make it right? Of course, we mention Africa because black people always wanted a fucking connection to Africa. That's our soul and our humanity. That's what we were lied and told. We were told we were African. I would tell your dumbass the same thing too if I kidnapped your uncle, if I kidnapped your mama and your daddy, and I sold you down to a, if you were walking around Ohio, Indiana, and I kidnapped you and sold you downriver, that's why I have terms like downriver, down by the riverside, and I sold you down that Mississippi, Ohio River to a plantation in Louisiana at the age of 3, 4, know what I'm gonna tell you? Okay, you little nigga, you came from Africa. Of course I'm gonna tell you that. This shit ain't yours. This ain't your plantation. You came from Africa. And that whole us come from Africa, that started to become a big thing more so in the early 1800s. But what they don't tell you is, yes, 12 years a slave, Solomon Northup, he was just one person that was a free American that was kidnapped. That was a major industry. The slave catchers, that was most of how the slave catchers made their money. They would get a free black person and kidnap them and sell them downriver. They don't tell you about the 100,000 slaves that was marched from Virginia to Mississippi when Mississippi became a state. All you got to do is study the history of Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, the Louisiana Purchase, and when those states became, became states, and all the slaves and before that, the Mississippian Wars in the Louisiana Territory, the Tuscaloosa people that the French were fighting, because there were a lot of wars that the French and the Spanish put on up and down that Mississippi River before the Americans got there. And you had these people who were fighting the French and the Spanish for damn near over 100 years. And then they started having wars with each other. And then when the Americans came in, they came in during the Mississippian Wars when the native tribes were fighting with each other. The loser was the white folks taking them as slaves. You got this whole history that you niggas don't look at because they tell you one aspect of history, the transatlantic slave trade, which in some part did happen, but that's just an aspect of history. You had the wars, the Yamasee War in Florida. You had wars all throughout this country, and them conquering the Midwest and the West, that took hundreds of years. Hundreds. The war started in 1619 and wasn't completed until what? The Kodiak people up in Washington finally got settled in 1890. The Sequoia here in California, the Sequoia region got settled by the Black Buffalo Soldiers, by the way, in 1880. General Allensworth. That war started in 1619. That's 260 years it took from them to get to Plymouth Rock, from Plymouth Rock to the West Coast. 260 years. There's a lot of history here that goes untouched and untalked about, so you niggas could talk about a goddamn slave trade. You see how that works? And then they'll tell you about the Africanness. Like I told you before, Baby Dodds, his granddaddy was Indian. Jimi Hendrix was Indian. Y'all just don't even talk about that. Chuck Berry, Indian. Louis Armstrong also talks about his Indian background and Jewish. A lot of our greats talk about being Indian. That's true too. Pam Grier, yeah. But they lied to us through omission. Just omit all this indigenous stuff, even though the indigenous influence is 90% of the story, 60% of the story. 30% of the story is European instruments, the piano, the saxophone, the harpsichord, instruments that we still actually use. And then when the 70s came, you started getting, 60s came, you started getting imitations of these natural instruments. And then by the time the 70s came and the 80s, Japan started mimicking electronic versions of these natural American instruments. But when you're dealing with the Roland TR-808 and the different drum machines, they're all mimicking American instruments. A lot of your original drum machines were programmed by James Gaston out of LA. He's still alive too. Harvey Mason, he's still alive too. Harvey Mason, James Gaston, these are the drummers' sounds that went into your original drum machines. These guys are still alive. So there are a lot deeper roots to Americanness in our stuff. And to spend the time talking African and what comes from Africa, you're mentioning things that you can't even find traces of in the sound today. That's Real Talk CCS, and no other group is hell-bent on giving credit away for their ethnic groups' music but us. It's weird behavior, right? And I'm here to put a stop to it. Not just me. I'm not saying I'm some fucking almighty, nothing like that. I used to talk like that. Then I said, this isn't right. I got to give credit where credit is due. I got to give credit to the music that got my grandmama through this stuff. Africa didn't help my grandmother survive Jim Crow. Count Basie did. Mahalia Jackson helped my grandfather survive Jim Crow. King Oliver, Louis Armstrong helped my great-great-granddaddy survive Jim Crow. Blind Tom Wiggins helped my great-great-great-great-granddaddy survive slavery into Reconstruction, into Jim Crow. When do we give them credit? When do we say it was Duke Ellington that helped my grandmama survive Jim Crow? When do I give honor to Duke? To B.B. King, Albert King, T-Bone Walker, Cab Calloway, Fats Waller. These are the people that helped our grandparents and great-grandparents survive Jim Crow. We're going to skip past all that to talk about an influence that most of us don't come from. And the ones that do come from there, they have 400 years to come rescue them and they didn't do nothing about it. Question. Just, and don't say this because you think you know how I'm going to feel about it. Give me an honest answer. For those of you who knew your grandmother, do you think that she feel a tad bit slighted that when you go to pray to your ancestors and you mention the ancestors, you don't think about her, but you pull up a symbol of some African logo and you start calling on African spirits as your ancestors? And your grandmama is the one that picked you up from school when you were sick? When do you give the attention and love to your grandma, to what helped your grandmama survive Jim Crow? Because it's our music that helped us get through all that shit. Yeah, Chief, they went through way too much to be forgotten. Man, all I know is Aretha Franklin helped my grandmama out. I was listening to some Reverend James Cleveland the other night thinking about my grandmother. When I want to feel my grandmother's love, I tap into her music. You know, so that me and my sister, when she was alive, me and my sister would be laughing like, we'd be like, oh shit, she playing this shit again. You know, when you a kid, I want to listen to some Janet Jackson. I don't want to listen to no damn James Cleveland. Shit, you know, as a kid, man, I want to, man, you be like, man, turn on some SWV. Grandmama listening to James Cleveland again. You know, when you're a kid, you just want what you want, you know. But when your grandmama's gone, man, I spent the other night, I probably played James Cleveland for like an hour, just in my grandmother's presence. And I felt her love through listening to James Cleveland. And my grandmother's song from James Cleveland was "This Too Shall Pass." And me and my sister used to be back. Every time my grandmother played that, me and my sister be in the backseat of the car laughing our ass off like, oh shit, here we go. We be goofy as hell laughing. Now that shit made me, James Cleveland brings back my grandmother's love every time. My grandfather, B.B. King. I want to sit in the presence of my grandfather. I'm listening to some B.B. King. I got an aunt that's like 91 that I never met my grandmother and my grandfather on my mom's side because they were both dead by the time I was born. But I talked to her about what her brother, my grandfather, listened to. And I listened to his music, to that music, and who her mom and dad listened to, my great-grandparents. I found out, you know, a lot about who they listened to. And you can get into their spirit. God dang, you see, your dad lost his blues soul music collection in Hurricane Katrina? Fuck. But we have our own thing, and if you just pay attention to the people who have an issue with what I'm saying, they can't tell you anything other than Africa gave us a banjo that we don't use. That's not true because America had its own style of that. The American banjo is different than, but anyway, they tell you, just go with it. They tell you to give us a banjo that we don't use. They'll tell you Africa gave us polyrhythms that they can't prove came from Africa because indigenous tribes in America have polyrhythms too. They tell you the drum came from Africa, which is a lie because the drum comes from wherever you stand. Every corner of the universe has a drum, and they play in accordance to their environment. A drum didn't have to get shipped from Africa to America for America to play a drum. The drums in America were from logs and trees in America with sheep, with whatever skin of whatever dead animal, buffalo hide, sheep hide, whatever animals were indigenous to America. It was buffalo hide here generally on our drums. In European drums, it was sheep hide. In Chinese drums, it's whatever animals. I haven't studied Chinese drums enough to be definite, but a drum is whatever trees are indigenous and whatever animal is indigenous to the environment. And every drum isn't a formal drum. Sometimes a drum is a rock. Sometimes a drum is the side of a wall. Sometimes a drum is a piece of wood that was laying on the ground. There's so many holes, and here's the reason why I'm willing to debate anybody on this. Because I've read every book that you read, okay? Every piece of scholarship talks about Africa this and Africa that. I just have an anthropology background, and I just ask the next simple question. Okay, if all this is Africa, okay, this is Africa, how much of it is used in today's music? What instruments are being used? What scale? How is the music being built? What is it centered around? And every time I look in America, it's something completely different. A different music scale, a different drum, a different way the sound is built. And the next question is, okay, if it comes from Africa, where in Africa are they still doing this thing that I'm doing here? Oh, that doesn't exist. Okay. Okay. Why is it in the last 100 years? What we do is influencing Africa, but there's nothing out of Africa influencing what we're doing. These are honest questions to ask. These are honest questions to ask. Who in Africa is influencing music in America today? And who in America is influencing music in Africa? Who's sampling who? Who's adapting whose instruments? If there's so much Africanness in our music, why isn't it still an influence? And why is so much of our influence put onto them? Yeah, Andre Bryan, I asked that question earlier to somebody that was telling me about Africa. I asked them what tribe, or at least give me a region. Can't answer it. It's just something that, and I'm about to get up out of here, but it sounds like to me that's something that they created to continue disinheriting Black Americans from our indigenous birthright and land here, which, if you ask me, is very important to maintain the stability of a nation, to get the people who control the nation's culture and the heartbeat of America, to keep them believing that they're African and everything good is from Africa. Keep them hidden as to who they really are. Because it doesn't add up. I gotta get the fuck up out of here, y'all. Enroll in my music course this summer. Sign-ups are right now on dewambi.com. We're starting at the end of June. The last Monday of June is when we starting, so that it's over by the time school starts for the kids. 5 weeks, $30 a class. And if you're on Patreon, you saw the discount code. If you're on Patreon, it's $50 off if you're a Patreon member. And if you're on Patreon, you saw the discount code, all right? I'll holler at y'all tomorrow.